I have watched Real Madrid for a long time, and there is one rule, one absolute law that governs the Santiago Bernabéu. You do not accept mediocrity. A bad month is a crisis. A bad season is a catastrophe. But 2 consecutive years without a single major trophy? That is not a drought. That is an institutional collapse. Think about it for a second. We are looking at a reality that has not existed in the Spanish capital for 20 years. An entire generation of fans has grown up never knowing what it feels like to see this iconic white shirt completely empty-handed for this long. You look at the squad. You look at the names. The hundreds of millions of euros walking onto the pitch every week. And you ask yourself, how is this even possible? It's been eating at me. Because something fundamental is broken inside that dressing room. And it's not just about kicking a ball anymore. The final whistle blew at Camp Nou, and the scoreboard offered no mercy. Barcelona 2. Real Madrid 0. The context makes it even more devastating. Marcus Rashford had already set the tone with an early, breathtaking free kick that completely paralyzed the Madrid wall, before Ferran Torres doubled the lead a mere 18 minutes into the match. The game was essentially over before it had a chance to breathe. 14 points. That is the insurmountable chasm that now separates Barcelona from Real Madrid at the top of La Liga, with only 3 agonizing matches left to play. Barcelona are officially champions, and they achieved it by systematically dismantling their greatest rivals on their own pitch. The morning papers in Madrid, Catalonia, and across Europe are predictably forensic in their analysis today. They are aggressively dissecting the defensive shape. They are drawing complex arrows on heat maps to demonstrate exactly how the midfield pivot was overrun by Barcelona's intensity. Pundits are endlessly debating expected goals, transition vulnerabilities, and the glaring structural failures in the final third. Every channel is talking about the missed defensive assignments and the tactical collapse at Camp Nou. But the real story has nothing to do with tactics. It has everything to do with what happened in the press room afterwards. When Alvaro Arbeloa walked into that post-match press conference, the atmosphere was suffocating. Arbeloa is not just a manager. He is a man who understands the historical DNA of this club better than almost anyone. He was a relentless soldier during the most politically charged eras of Real Madrid. He understands the crushing weight of the badge. But sitting there, under the glaring lights of the media, officially confirming that the league title was surrendered to Barcelona, he didn't look like a tactician, explaining a 9-0-minute defeat. He looked profoundly exhausted. He looked like a man standing in the smoldering wreckage of a dressing room war. He started with the standard diplomatic protocol. He acknowledged the pain. We understand the frustration and the feeling of dissatisfaction of the fans about this season, Arbeloa stated. He promised that Real Madrid always comes back, referencing the countless times the club has fallen and risen again. The generous reading of this introduction is that it was a heartfelt apology to a demanding fan base. The less generous reading? It was a man desperately trying to buy time in a building where time is the most expensive currency. But then, a reporter inevitably asked the question everyone in the room had on their minds. The question about Kylian Mbappé, the missing superstar, the injured Galactico whose absence was conveniently being used by fans and analysts alike as a massive shield to protect their collective pride. It was the perfect opportunity for Arbeloa to take the easy way out, to play the victim of circumstance. He could have blamed the medical department for their failures. He could have talked at length about fixture congestion and bad luck. He could have reminded everyone that no tactical system in world football can survive without its absolute apex predator leading the line. He did none of those things. Instead, Arbeloa looked directly at the press corps and delivered a sentence that completely shifted the tectonic plates of the club. When pressed about the reliance on the injured French forward, Arbeloa deflected and said, "We need a change in collective mentality, instead of relying too much on individuals." That is not a manager lamenting an unfortunate injury crisis. That is a targeted political statement. Arbeloa, standing at the absolute lowest point of Real Madrid's modern history, chose the exact moment the title was lost to expose the rot underneath the floorboards. While the rest of the football world was mourning the absence of a superstar, the manager was quietly revealing that the superstar culture itself is exactly what is tearing this empire apart. To understand the gravity of this situation, you have to look at the man sitting behind the microphone. Alvaro Arbeloa is not a mercenary who parachuted into the Santiago Bernabéu for a lucrative payday. He is a fundamental piece of modern Real Madrid history. During his playing days, He was the ultimate soldier. He was the man who understood the political weight of the badge. A player who would go to war in the trenches of El Clasico without a second thought. He knows the complex, unforgiving media landscape of the Spanish capital better than almost anyone. He knows that the press room can be far more dangerous than the pitch itself. When he took his seat after the Barcelona defeat, the flashes of the cameras illuminated a manager who looked completely drained of his usual defiance. The initial phase of his press conference was an exercise in pure damage control. It was the standard diplomatic protocol, designed to momentarily pacify a furious fanbase and a hostile boardroom. "We cannot say much right now," Arbeloa stated, his voice lacking its characteristic authority. "We understand the frustration and the feeling of dissatisfaction of the fans about this season. All we can do is continue working, look towards the future, and learn from the mistakes made this year. Real Madrid always comes back. We have fallen and gotten up many times." You hear the echoes of the classic Madrid ethos, the eternal, romantic promise of hasta el final. Vamos Real. You see a manager taking responsibility, absorbing the pressure, and vowing to rebuild the empire. But that is not a rallying cry. That is a plea for survival. When a manager of a club with the infinite resources of Real Madrid has to rely on the historical romanticism of coming back after back-to-back trophyless seasons, it reveals a terrifying reality. It means the foundational structure of the present is completely broken. The rhetoric of the glorious chaotic comeback is usually reserved for a frantic 90-minute Champions League knockout tie. It is not supposed to be the strategic blueprint for a multi-billion-euro sporting institution across a 3-8-game league campaign. Arbeloa's reliance on historical mystique is a massive red flag. He knows that his tactical acumen is being aggressively questioned behind closed doors. He knows that Florentino Perez does not tolerate managers who oversee periods of barren, uninspiring transition. By invoking the grand history of the club, Arbeloa was desperately trying to buy time. He was attempting to align himself with the eternal institution of Real Madrid, hoping that the board would view him as a long-term architect, rather than a disposable casualty of this catastrophic campaign. However, the complete loss of control we witnessed on the pitch against Barcelona was merely a symptom of a much deeper institutional paralysis. The lack of definitive direction from the upper management over the last 2 years has trickled down into every single aspect of the squad. When Marcus Rashford and Ferran Torres were tearing through the defensive lines at Camp Nou, they were not just exploiting tactical gaps. They were exposing a team that has completely forgotten how to suffer together. In previous eras, when Real Madrid lacked a coherent tactical system, they survived on sheer collective willpower and the immense gravity of their locker room leaders. But this current iteration of the squad operates entirely differently. Arbeloa is standing on the touchline, trying to orchestrate a symphony, but he has been handed a collection of highly paid soloists who are all playing completely different tunes. The internal hierarchy is fundamentally broken. The players are looking to the bench for answers, and the bench is looking to the boardroom for authority. This brings us to the absolute breaking point. The diplomatic shield of learning from mistakes was never going to last long under the aggressive, forensic questioning of the Madrid press. They smelled blood in the water. They knew that the mistakes Arbeloa was vaguely referring to were not just about missed marking assignments or poor pass completion rates. They were about the untouchable figures in the dressing room, and they only needed one specific question to make the entire diplomatic facade crumble. The tension in the press room reached its absolute peak when the inevitable question was finally asked. You could feel the collective breath of the journalists holding. It was the question about the ghost haunting the Santiago Bernabéu, the multi-million-euro elephant in the room, Kylian Mbappé. The French superstar's injury had been the dominating narrative on every sports network leading up to El Clasico. The entire media apparatus had framed this match not as a battle of tactical systems, but as a question of survival. Could Real Madrid withstand the Catalan storm without their absolute apex predator leading the line? It was the perfect excuse. It was a golden ticket handed directly to Alvaro Arbeloa to absolve himself of the tactical humiliation at Camp Nou. All he had to do was lean into the microphone, lament the medical department's failures, and remind the world that you cannot replace a generational talent. He could have constructed a narrative where the 14-point deficit was simply a tragic consequence of biology, not a failure of management. But he didn't. When pressed about Mbappé's absence and his potential return, Arbeloa offered a brief, almost dismissive medical update before delivering the line that changes everything we know about this current Real Madrid squad. He said, And I quote, "We need a change in collective mentality instead of relying too much on individuals." Every major outlet right now is busy analyzing whether Mbappe will be fit for the final 3 meaningless matches of the season. They are entirely missing the point. That statement from Arbeloa is not a throwaway comment about team spirit. That is a targeted, premeditated missile aimed directly at the heart of the dressing room. When the manager of Real Madrid, the club that literally invented the modern Galactico model, the club whose entire global identity is built on acquiring the most marketable, dominant individuals on the planet, publicly denounces the reliance on those very individuals, the tectonic plates are shifting. This is the secret revelation. Arbeloa is essentially confirming the darkest fears of the Madrid faithful. He is admitting that the dressing room is not a cohesive unit fighting for a singular goal, but a fractured collection of massive egos operating in total isolation. When a club's methodology relies entirely on individual brilliance to pull off miraculous, last-minute comebacks, it is not actually a tactical system at all. It is a gamble. And when those individuals are injured, out of form, or simply not interested in tracking back to defend, the entire house of cards instantly collapses. By specifically demanding a change in collective mentality, in the exact moment he was asked about Kylian Mbappe, Arbeloa was doing something incredibly dangerous. He was separating the concept of the team from the concept of the superstar. He was drawing a very clear line in the sand. On one side, you have the tactical discipline, the sacrifice, the willingness to suffer without the ball, the collective. On the other side, you have the player power, the astronomical wages, the individual branding, and the toxic expectation that one man will magically fix deep structural deficits. Look back at the history of this institution. The squads that actually dominated Europe, the ones that built undeniable dynasties, they possessed superstars. Absolutely. But they also possessed a rigid core of players who bled for the badge, who provided the foundational stability that allowed the Galacticos the freedom to shine. Right now, Arbeloa is looking at a squad that is all crown and absolutely no foundation. He is staring into a locker room that has forgotten how to be a team, and he is using his post-match press conference to declare open war on that culture. Now, we have to be completely objective here. The generous reading of Arbeloa's press conference is that he is simply an exhausted tactician venting his immediate frustration. He is a manager who spent the entire summer meticulously designing a tactical framework, only to watch it disintegrate because his most lethal weapon, Kylian Mbappe, spent too much time on the treatment table. In this version of the story, his call for a collective mentality is just a standard managerial cliché. It is a desperate plea for the remaining players on the pitch to run a little harder, to cover a little more ground against a ruthless Barcelona side that had just dismantled them. The less generous reading? And frankly, the one that aligns far more accurately with the ruthless political reality of the Santiago Bernabéu? Arbeloa has realized he cannot manage this dressing room, and he has decided to burn the narrative down before the club inevitably burns him. You have to understand where the true power lies in this institution. When a manager publicly criticizes an over-reliance on individual brilliance at Real Madrid, he is not just criticizing the work rate of his players. He is directly challenging the highest authority at the club, Florentino Perez. Perez is not just a president, he is the absolute architect of the modern Galactico era. His entire sporting and economic philosophy is built on the unwavering belief that assembling the most marketable, transcendent individuals will organically lead to both unprecedented commercial dominance and European glory. Under Perez, the system is the individuals. So, when Arbeloa sits under the media spotlight and declares that this exact philosophy is the root cause of their failure, he is crossing a very dangerous line. That is not a post-match analysis. That is a fundamental critique of the president's business model. He is essentially looking up at the presidential box, pointing at the catastrophic 14-point gap behind Barcelona, and telling the architect that his blueprint is fundamentally flawed. History tells us exactly how this power struggle ends. When there is a conflict between a manager's desire for a collective system and the board's demand for a superstar reality at Real Madrid, the manager is always the one who pays the price. Arbeloa knows this better than anyone. He lived through the revolving door of managers during his playing career. He knows that suggesting the club should prioritize a cohesive, perhaps unglamorous system over the individual gravity of a generational talent like Mbappe is borderline heresy in the Spanish capital. This shifts the entire context of his press conference. He was not speaking to the fans, and he certainly wasn't trying to protect his players from the media fallout. He was drawing the battle lines. He was loudly declaring that if he is going to be the scapegoat for the worst 2-year stretch in modern Madrid history, he is going to make sure everyone knows exactly why the ship is actually sinking. He is refusing to be remembered as the manager who just couldn't make the Galacticos work together. Instead, he is aggressively positioning himself as the man who tried to warn the club that relying on individuals was the wrong approach in the first place. The league campaign is mathematically over for Real Madrid. Those remaining 3 fixtures are nothing more than a painful, extended funeral procession for a season that died on the pitch at Camp Nou. But while the football has stopped mattering, the political warfare inside the Santiago Bernabéu is just about to reach a boiling point. In the coming days, Alvaro Arbeloa will have to walk into the presidential boardroom. He will have to sit across from Florentino Perez and defend not just his tactical failures against a rampant Barcelona, but his deliberate, public denunciation of the club's core Galactico philosophy. History tells us exactly how this ends. In a war between a manager demanding a collective system and a president protecting a multi-million euro superstar brand, the manager's head is always the one that rolls. Arbeloa almost certainly knows that by making that statement, he was writing his own resignation letter. He is offering himself up as the sacrificial lamb, standing in front of the firing squad, hoping that the shockwave of his inevitable departure might finally force the institution to wake up. 2 consecutive years without a major trophy is an anomaly this club cannot ignore. The question is no longer whether Arbeloa will survive the summer. The question is whether Perez will actually listen to the warning his manager just gave him, or simply buy another superstar to paper over the cracks. I have been watching this club for years, man. And this whole situation, this creeping realization that the badge doesn't mean what it used to inside that locker room, it's been eating at me. Tell me in the comments what you actually think. Is Alvaro Arbeloa right that player power and this toxic reliance on individuals are destroying Real Madrid's collective mentality? Or is he just a failing manager looking for a convenient excuse to save his own skin after a disastrous season? Come back to this video when the summer transfer window opens, because heads are absolutely going to roll in the Spanish capital, and I guarantee you that the exits, the signings, and the narrative the club pushes will all trace directly back to the 4 words Arbeloa dropped in that press room. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.